The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day or top of the evening, this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
And I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And we're storytellers. And we're here for an hour to share one of the things we really like about living, and that's storytelling.
You bet.
Listening, telling, maybe writing stories. Although writing is a real discipline, you know. Some of us don't have a lot of discipline.
Well, creating stories, it takes discipline. No? Just experiencing and then telling. I consider you a natural raconteur.
Yeah.
I am a highly analytical raconteur.
Right. That may be accurate. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is that in some regards, most of us, and I would be bold and say all of us, are storytellers in some way, because we like to share the human experience that we either see or certainly are involved with. And have you been involved in some really neat storytelling this month? Well,
just Sunday, I was at the 9th production of Storytelling up in Salem, New York.
Of storytelling?
Of storytelling. Now, if you're not a native of this area, such as like me, you might not know where Salem is. But you go to Saratoga, and then you drive northeast, wiggle, 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 another half an hour.
Do you have to cross a river?
You're by the Battenkill.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think we actually cross it, but you're by the Battenkill. And before you get to Vermont,
that's Salem.
You get to Salem.
And they have a storytelling theater, something there that started?
It's a spin-off from our word plays in he knew that.
Oh,
it's a spin-off from our word plays at Proctor's, and Siri Allison suggested that we do that. She lives in Salem. There's an old church that's been renovated by a man called Jay Kerr, and the main sanctuary is a big theater, and then what used to be the baptismal area is a cabaret that seats 45 and has just a one step up stage that is about twice as big as this table. Just perfect for storytelling or a one singer cabaret.
And you had a good turnout?
We had about 30 people there.
Great.
But what I really liked, I liked all the stories. Tom Weekly was there, who's one of our retired members.
And he was there telling.
He was there telling.
Good for him.
And Christy Keegan and Joe Peck were told the stories that they're going to be telling at the celebration at Proctor's.
In just a week or so.
Right, but it'll already have happened by the time you're seeing this. But what I really liked is there was a student of Margaret French and Betty Cassidy. They've been getting grants through Kramer Library up in Glens Falls to teach people how to tell their personal stories. And Margaret Watterson is one of their graduates.
Uh-huh.
And so she told her third story for Telebration, and she did it so well. She was so relaxed. It was an epiphany that she had. She didn't call it that as such, but I view it as a personal epiphany when she was taking care of her mother who was suffering from dementia. So her mother in her last years of her life. Mm-hmm. One afternoon they were out in a restaurant, and her mother suddenly slipped and went back to, before she was married, going out to eat with a friend of hers. And she said, "You see those two guys over there?" There were no two guys over there. "They are our dates. They are supposed to be over here. What are we going to do about that?" And Margaret decided to join in. And so she expressed it as she got to experience her mother, a mother that she had never known, a woman that she had never known, because this was her mother, her college-age mother. And while some people would have, her cousins in particular, did not like it when Margaret did things like this, she said it was one of her fondest memories of being with her mother.
But that's a great. There's a lot of good ideas there. One, the example of how you deal with somebody with dementia, but Salem is a community in and of itself. And what's happened there, as a nucleus of storytellers have started the program, is you have a new way of encouraging or building community, and it's just magical to be in that space. I've been there for other performances. So think about places where you want to build community, and if you're looking for a method for how to do that, think about storytelling. Yep. And there are a whole bunch of examples of storytelling on our website, which is at storycircle@proctors.org. And if you go there, you can watch this show.
Click on YouTube.
Click on YouTube, and you can see the show, which has a guest teller, and also there's about 150 plus edited stories in various ways, and you might get an idea about how you might frame up a story swap or a gathering for post-service or PTA or something like that. Well, I've been really busy with a lot of stuff, and I had a wonderful time to tell twice with Nancy Marie Payne, and we told at the Ben Schleich Mansion some historical ghost stories, and I got to lead a tour of a cemetery that got there through this forest of locust trees that were fairly narrow. They weren't big locust trees. And there were reenactors in there that jumped out and scared everybody. And I knew that the reenactors were there, but they were so good scariers that I screamed. So then everybody laughed at the fact that I screamed, and then they jumped out at them and they screamed too. So we had a great time. And so stories can be energetic and scare. And then we had a wonderful program that Nancy and I did on Irish blessings and Blarney at the Irish American Heritage Museum. And that was just more fun than two people ought to have. That was really great. So yeah, we did well. All those are programs that are going on in various parts of our community. We'd like to have you aware of them. We'll talk about coming events, but we have a really good friend and storyteller with us as our guest today, our feature, and it's Eliud Nieves. Did I say that right?
Nieves.
And he drove all the way up here in the rain, and we really appreciate
From
that.
Ithaca.
From Ithaca, New York. And he just kind of wandered in, and it's hard to wander in from 3 hours away, and sat down, and he has a wonderful background in so many things. Welcome. So good to have you here in sharing stories and telling your story. And
how did you find us? I don't think it's ever occurred to me to ask.
How did I find you?
Story
Yes.
Circle.
Yeah.
Story Circle. Well, actually, I sent the tape in when you were having the Riverway Festival.
Okay.
And I was selected to perform at one of those, and I actually at this
Oh, is that
the
the
library right here, and that's how I got interested. I said, this looks like a good group. Let me just.
Okay.
We were a good group. Did you hear that? Okay.
Very good
okay.
group.
It was a good group.
was a
10
good
years
group. That
of good. I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
That I must have seen you there, but
It's a long time ago.
okay. So back to more pertinent things.
And one of the questions I like to ask guests, and I may have asked this in some other setting, but how did you discover that you were a storyteller? Did you have a family member who was a storyteller? How did it all happen that you became one?
Well, it all started with my mother. She was a family storyteller. And my mother, I think she only had a 6th grade education, but she was well read. She would devour books, she would read them, find stories, and she would put me to sleep when I was a little child by telling me a story. And when she didn't have one that she had read, she would just make one up. So I kind of grew up telling stories myself, and when I started teaching, I used that with my students as well.
Now, as a teacher, which level did you teach? I mean, were you talking to big kids or little kids or in between?
Elementary school, so anywhere from kindergarten to 6th grade.
What a treat it would have been to have you as a teacher for my 4th or 5th grade. I'm just thinking that, because I loved my teachers, don't get me wrong, but I didn't have any guys. And I did have some storytellers, but that was a real blessing for those kids, I bet.
It was, and I think for me,
For you.
the best part of teaching was the children. So
Now, when you're doing work at an elementary level, it's not like you have a specialist. You can have an interest in 4th grade for 1 year, and then you got to take somebody in 2nd grade the next year, right? And then and so you're probably more of a generalist as an educator than a specialist, right?
more of a generalist, yes. So I was in the classroom, but I also had some training in art. So I was an art teacher for years, and I even did PE for a couple of years. I just needed somebody. I said, hey, I'll do it. I volunteered, and.
It sounds like you applied a lot of what you learned in school and in teaching to other situations. Is that a fair statement?
I would say so, yeah.
My impression of it.
And I'm curious as to how you incorporated storytelling into your classroom. I know there are many ways, so I was just wondering which ways you used.
Well, actually, when I was doing art, sometimes I would write a story, and I would talk about an illustrator and what their job is. I said, well, I'm going to tell you a story that you've never heard before, and I want you to be the illustrator and illustrate the story. That's one way. But I actually, when I was working in Brevard County, Florida, the Space Coast, I actually started a storytelling festival for children. I got together with a local storyteller, and we started a storytelling festival. So we would go from school to school, and the district was kind enough to release me from my duties. We would go to different schools and do a little storytelling and tell them about storytelling and about the festival and try to get the schools interested. And that went on for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. I didn't know we had a producer here, too. Good.
We need a spin-off in Ithaca. Yeah. We'll talk to you later. I'm just curious who the storyteller was in Florida.
Well, she's passed away since. Her name was Ada Forney.
Okay.
And she was a folklore storyteller.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Cool.
Wow. And in that environment, you were able to touch the local community culture of Florida, which is part of the things that begins to build up the community. Is that people are telling stories about themselves and in their own locale, in their own history. I think that's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's art. That's art. That really is.
It was fun.
And then you got to Ithaca, and that was so you've lived in New York City. That's where you were born and taught for a while. Then you taught in Florida, and then you came to upstate New York.
He was born in Puerto Rico.
I was born in Puerto Rico.
You were born in Puerto Rico, okay, but you were educated in New York.
Right. Yes.
All right, but it seems to me that I understand. Puerto Rico is warm, Florida is warm. New York City is not warm. Ithaca can be downright cold, and so you've kind of moved. You've moved a little bit retroactively. Or whatever.
I did it in reverse, and I get criticized for that. Oh, you did it backwards. You're supposed to go back to Florida. Well, anyway, I like the change of seasons, so I can put up with the cold.
And you don't miss the palmetto bugs.
No.
I mean, that's flying cockroaches. It's like
they call them palmetto bugs, but
yeah, right. We give them a nice name,
Yeah,
but it's like they're bad enough on the ground, but or the walls, but
Well, I agree. My wife went to school in Ithaca, and we visit once or twice a year, and I think it's really one of the most beautiful places in the world.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. My brother went to Cornell, so I knew about that.
And it just so I think your logic is right on. We would love to hear a story, and then we'll talk about it. Sure. We really do appreciate you driving up and being with us today.
Thank you.
Eliud.
Okay, so the first story I have is called Robert's Angel. Robert sat on a park bench on a cold morning in November. He should have been shivering from the cold, but he wasn't. He didn't feel anything. He had been sleeping on park benches and alleyways for so long, his body didn't react to the elements. And if he ever did start to feel anything, he had a bottle in his pocket that would take care of that. Pigeons began to gather in masses where somebody had dropped some pieces of bread. And they moved closer and closer, and as those birds touched each other, they became a puddle of gray water. Somebody walked by, and the water began to churn violently and turn and spin until it transformed itself into a dragon. The dragon flew straight up, and it drifted towards Robert, and it hovered above his head. The frightened man moved as quickly as he could, and he hid behind an overflowing garbage can to avoid being devoured by the beast. He closed his eyes and began to tremble. The cold didn't faze him, but that dragon made him shake like a leaf. Bobby! What the hell are you doing now? Why are you so afraid of everything? You should be like your brother John. He was so brave, he volunteered for the army, and he died a hero. And look at you, cowering under the bed because some stupid moth flew through the window. Shake it off. Suck it up. Put on your big girl panties and get ready for school. Why did Mom have to be so cruel? It wasn't his fault John died in the war. Robert opened his eyes slowly, and he looked up. There was nothing there. Beyond the bench where he had been sitting were a few pigeons pecking away at breadcrumbs. He looked at the garbage can, and he saw a half-eaten bagel, and he decided to eat it to see if it would quiet the rumblings in his stomach. And when he moved the bagel to his mouth, he noticed how filthy his hands were. But then again, so was the rest of his body. He couldn't remember the last time he changed his clothes or took a shower. Maybe it was that time a few years back when that preacher tried to get him to go into the shelter with promises of salvation. The Lord is going to change your life, brother. You're going to be a new man. Well, that all sounded good. He went into the shelter, he had a shower, he got new clothes, and a hot meal. And then they put him into a room with 3 other men, and he was sleeping on a very comfortable cot and dreaming of better times, better places, and he slept soundly until he was awakened by a punch in the left eye. One of the men was on top of him, punching him and grabbing the chain that had been his father, that gold chain. And he had a vivid picture of his mother giving it to him after the funeral. I don't know why your father wanted you to have this. Maybe, probably because the son that was the real man died in the war, so he had to go to the sissy. But Robert knew it was because his father loved him, even if he was different, even if he was afraid of just about everything. His father loved him, even if he knew that sometimes Robert felt like he was a girl. John and his mother were always calling him names and teasing him, and his father was the one who stepped in and made them stop. His father was gone, and so was his chain. He remembered walking out of the shelter with a swollen, throbbing eye and blood dripping from his lip. It was a moonless night in January. He walked into an alley. He lied on the pavement and cried himself to sleep. Night turned into morning. Day came. The day turned into the week into months, the months into years. The years passed, but everything remained the same. Robert could have been the picture of the man on that discarded Time magazine he saw on the ground in the alley where he slept every day. Except for the fading, no matter what time of year or what the weather, the picture remained the same. He was a discarded picture. He ate that bagel and began to weep. Feeling sorry for himself was pathetic, but to him, it was better than having no feelings at all. The time of day, the sun was a little bit bright, so Robert walked into the alley and he sat down. And soon, snow started to fall, and the snow got heavier. So he reached into his pocket and he pulled out that bottle and he gulped down whatever was remaining. And it wasn't long after that things in front of him began to get blurry and his eyes began to close. And he began to tremble and shake, and it wasn't because it was cold. He felt like he was dying, like his body was being carried somewhere, like he was floating. He soon lost all consciousness. And when he was able to open his eyes again, all he saw was white. Was he looking at clouds? Was it the snowy street? Was he in heaven? If it was probably a mistake. He noticed a figure walking towards him. And as it got closer, he could tell that it was a slender woman. Was it an angel? If it was an angel, she was an Asian angel. The angel sat next to Robert and she held his hand. Her skin was soft and warm, and her fragrance was like a perfume that John had sent Mom from overseas. It's something called Ilang Ilan. He was soon back asleep. After a million dreams, Robert woke up, hoping that hallucination was over, but there she was, still holding his hand. When she saw his eyes open, she squeezed his hand and smiled. Then she did something that shocked him. She leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. She spoke in a soft and gentle voice that reminded him of a lullaby, like his mother used to sing to him when he was very little, before she found out that he was different. She began to tell him her story. Her name was Tu Yen. As a child, she lived in Vietnam with her single mom. Her dad had been killed in the war before she was born. Her mom struggled to survive until she met a young American soldier named John Cooper. They fell in love and they were married. So John was the only dad that Tu Yen ever knew. He would tell them that when his last tour was over, they would all come and live with him in the States. But then one day, he didn't return. And they found out that he had been killed in an ambush. Now, with the insurance money that her mom received after his death, they lived quite well. And Tu Yen was able to study, go to school, and eventually became a doctor. And she had heard that John had a brother named Robert, and she had searched for him with no success, and she was about to give up when a miracle occurred. This man was found lying under a blanket of snow, shivering, and he was brought to the hospital where she worked as the chief of the ER. And when they searched him for ID, they learned that his name was Robert Cooper. And in his possession was a folded up, yellowing newspaper obituary for Sergeant John Cooper. Robert could not believe what he was hearing. And with tears in his eyes, he asked in a soft voice, Tu Yen, what does your name mean? She smiled and said, it means angel. I will be your angel, Uncle Robert, as she gave him a hug.
Oh, wow. I had no idea where you were going. No idea, and it was so vivid, it was scary at times. But that's the way you intended it, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow.
And this is an original story of
Yes, it
yours.
is.
Yes.
Oh, and so you drew on your background in the city and your background, because you were a medic during Vietnam.
I was a medic in Vietnam, yes.
Oh, wow.
He was a conscientious objector.
So I was a medic without a weapon.
Medic without a weapon. Wow. Wow.
So that's
I
Robert
don't know
Angel.
about the audience out there in the TV land, but I'm speechless, and that doesn't usually happen on this show. Tell us where the kernel of the idea came from, because there's a couple of kernels that I can think of. But
Well, I started a storytelling group in Montreux Falls, which is about maybe 45 minutes from Ithaca.
Right.
Right now, the group is just the librarian, myself, and another gentleman who comes by. So we create a prompt to write a story. So it's like a writing, storytelling kind of. And this was the prompt. I forget what the prompt was, because
wow.
so.
Let's see. Hallucinations.
Yeah, I'm not.
It's
Abusive mother.
So this is the first time I tell the story. I read it after I had written. I just read it to the group. This is the first time I tell it.
what's unusual about the story in you is that you provided the image of the dragon, which was obviously a hallucination,
Right.
and then the question is whether that actually happened or whether he imagined it happening and those kind of things. So you've got this vivid image, and you've not explained it. You've placed it there for us to really be awed by, and then you step to another place where he's again goes back and forth between the presence of the bagel, the ever-present nature of the bottle in his pocket, and the mission experience.
Right.
And then you theme that up into the present again, and move him into the alley where it starts to snow. And all this time you've got this other family dialogue underlying the whole thing and tying it together, but you don't recognize that storyline is even there until she begins to tell her story.
Correct. Yeah.
That is amazing. I mean,
See, now I would have diagrammed that out on Excel, going, okay, this, and that's where we put in this, and this.
and he did it in the library in Montreux Falls. Yeah, give me a break.
It just kind of flows. So you know,
And the kernel of and I'm not talking about colonel in the military one, but the kernel of the street person, the Vietnam experience, the ramifications of that, the residual nature of that.
Well, no,
I
he
mean, you
wasn't
speak-
in Vietnam. It was his brother who was in Vietnam.
But it was the relationship with Vietnam that was still haunting. It had haunted the relationships at home. I mean, you speak to a whole bunch of current issues.
correct. Yeah.
Almost simultaneously, and until you begin to really peel it back, you don't even see them all.
Right.
Which
And there's just that slight, that tiny scene where he remembered being very young and his mother telling him stories before she knew he was different, before his older brother died, before,
Right.
she was,
Right.
obviously, you lose a child, you're never the same.
Right, because we see people in the street that are homeless, that are, filthy, and they haven't. And sometimes you forget that these are humans that have a story. That maybe there's a reason why they are the way they are. So that's the whole humanity of the situation.
and I loved your ending, the resolution, and I had no idea how you'd ever resolve that story. But it's unconditional love. It's the young woman sharing the love that she had from his brother with Uncle Robert, and that was, in terms of leaving a moral, leaving a lesson behind. That's just very artistic. I always thought you were a good storyteller, but I'm just sitting here in awe because of the intricacy of the stuff that you pulled off. Because often when you put those kinds of hallucinations
in 11 minutes.
in 11
That
minutes.
wasn't a movie. That was
wasn't a movie.
11
That was
minutes.
Let me just ask you another question, Eliud. What are you going to do with that? Because that's a very strong, powerful story for you to tell, but also for people to hear. And I'm thinking about work in the VA, which we never got around to really doing more with. And I'm just thinking about a number of places that it might resonate. And it's certainly publishable too. I mean, I think.
Well, yeah, I have several short stories that I've written that, my wife says I write dark stories, but I try to find a silver lining in my stories, but some kind of hope. But so, publishing is always a possibility, although it's not, not the easiest thing to get done. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, and I'm really pleased that you've got this Montour Falls Writing Group, because I think that's a nice both outlet, and I bet you're providing the framework that helps bring it together too.
Yes.
Good for you. Good for you. I hate to go to current events in a way,
but
because it's hard to segue. And I have to.
Yes, but for other stories, which might not be so, let's see, deep, dramatic, dark.
No, dark. I wouldn't say. I'll call it dark.
I wouldn't say
Deep. I would refer to it as deep.
Deep and meaningful, emotional.
Reflective.
Yes. The series that Joe started a couple of years ago, First Tuesday's Tales and Stuff in the Stockade section of Schenectady, on the first Tuesday of the month. That's why it's called First Tuesday, right? Yes. Modico from Amherst will be here on December 6th. She's trained as both a mime and a storyteller, and she was a featured storyteller at the National Storytelling Festival this fall, which is like playing Broadway or Carnegie Hall.
Well, and we have to confess a little bit on this. Modico is one of our favorite people, Kate and I, and many of the local storytellers, and we have yet to get her on this show and to have her then available on our website. So we had an ulterior motive that if we got her over here, we'd like to have her do something else and interact with our community. So she's coming to Arthur's to do that after she tapes the show.
Right. So that's she'll be our December featured storyteller on this TV show.
And she, like Eliud, is mesmerizing. She can be. The first time I ever heard her tell was over at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I still remember it vividly because of the way she moved, the way her language and tone. It was just so evocative, and if you come to Arthur's, you'll remember it for a while. So
Yes.
Please join us.
Yes, and she has a gamut of a large range of stories that are, some are just humorous. There's a tradition in Japan, rakugo. It starts with an R. I'm sorry. So she's developing stories there, but then folk tales that are magical. And then she has some wonderful personal stories too.
Yeah.
And then she has a story about a woman who feels she can't fart in her mother-in-law's home, and that creates a grave problem. But she never says the word fart. And I heard her tell that at the National Storytelling Festival when she wasn't a featured teller. So years and years ago, and there she was, this beautiful petite woman in a red kimono, and you're going, she's talking about a woman who wants to fart, isn't she? Yeah, she is.
Well, so much for the classy lady we were talking about.
So she's multidimensional in many ways. Now, Joe, you're doing something on December 9th, the Friday of that week in December.
Well, I go to the First Reformed Church, and we've started a word service on Friday night. We have a jazz vespers, and this is actually it's not something I started. There are 3 or 4 people who do various things with writing and poetry, and it's designed to just bring that together in a vesper-like experience. And I'm going to do stories of the season as kind of the feature, but there'll be poetry, there'll be a little music, there'll be a little scripture, but it's an ecumenical environment. It isn't so much a Christian evangelistic environment, and there are refreshments, so it's a little bit.
And the time is
7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. It doesn't go long, so. And the features have been known to go out and sample libations in downtown Schenectady, but I wouldn't want to put anybody on the offensive with that. So
okay.
God forbid you go to church and then go to the pub. I mean, but sorry about that.
God forbid. Yes. Moving right along, then. A monthly happening up in Saratoga, the Saratoga Storytelling Open Mic on the second Wednesday of the month will be on December 12th at 7 p.m. in Woodlawn Commons, which is part of the Wesley community in a senior residence in just west of Skidmore in Saratoga. I think the best way to describe is the building is behind hospice. And get directions to hospice and go past its driveway, and the big building behind you is the one where the storytelling is.
And this is a good example where storytelling is entering into a community, and there's a mutuality back and forth between the folks who live in the assisted living environment and the storytellers, and it's just refreshing. I want to say, you don't say that about us, old people all the time, but
yes.
It's refreshing.
But non-residents are quite welcome
Right.
to come, and either just as listeners or as tellers also. Then the Friday of that week, so that's the second Wednesday, but the way the dates go, the third Friday is Friday, December 16th at 7 p.m. in the Inquiring Minds Bookstore in Saugerties. Janet Carter will have a program with a guest storyteller.
And that's a great place to tell, too. It's a coffee house, storefront, books, hardwood floors, great coffee and dessert.
Mm-hmm. And then to round off December, in terms of storytelling that we know about, Story Circle will have its meeting right here at the Colonie Town Library. No, not right here. I'm sorry. It's December. See, we're having our November meeting tonight right here,
Right.
But this is the December program, so I'm talking about Wednesday, December 19th at the Pine Hills branch of Albany Public Library at 6:15 to 9, where we share stories under development. No reading. You could have an outline that you refer to if you're not quite sure what goes where, but it's not a writer's program.
And we
where you're-
encourage, if you're interested in coming and learning more about the art of storytelling and trying storytelling and sharing an opportunity with a story, this is the place. And we welcome folks, and we're always impressed by some of the creativity that shows up at our regular meetings.
And we recently had someone show up who wanted to read, so he didn't know, so we let him read the first time, but we said the next time. And he came back.
That's right.
He came back, so that was, and telling. So that was a great leap forward for him.
And for us.
Yes. Writers are fine. Writers are really fine. But as a performing art, storytelling to me is so intimate. Now, most storytellers, unlike the theatrical productions, we like to see our audience. We like to look at them. And when they go like this, I like to go, you know what I mean. It's more of a collaboration than theater is. Though actors say, oh, we listen to the audience. Yeah, but we can see them. And we can recognize them, as opposed to the people on stage are pretending they're somebody else. We're sort of pretending, the audience is sort of pretending they're not there.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. And then just remember that if you want some stories, you can always go to our website. Joe mentioned this earlier. Go to storycircle@proctors.org. You can click on YouTube to get individual stories, or you can click on Story by Story, the name of this TV show. And now the whole episodes are available, so you can listen to our discussions of storytelling as well as hearing stories that are scattered throughout.
And the other information that's on the website is most of what Kate has kind of shared with you in terms of coming events, because those are under various categories of things like the open mics and those kinds of things.
Yeah, there's in the upper right-hand corner, there's other events, and that if I'm up on my game, I put a copy of the email that I send out at the beginning of the month.
Right.
About things, so you can find out about it there. Okay, so that's it for coming events. We have about 20 minutes left. Yeah. So back with Eliud. Do you have another story that will curl my hair some more, or?
Well, I have. Actually, this is the story that I told way back at the festival at this library.
Oh, really?
Okay.
So
It's just a Riverway story.
So it's a folk tale that from Puerto Rico, but actually I found that this story exists in other cultures. It's in Europe, it's in Haiti, and it's called Tia Miseria. So, Tia Miseria was a very old woman. She lived in a little house in a small town in Puerto Rico, and she had a small garden. And the pride of her garden was a mango tree. That tree bore the best mangoes from anywhere. People would come from miles, and if you ask her nicely, politely, she would share. She would give you one or two. But the children didn't want to ask. They snuck into the garden, they climbed the tree, and they would steal her mangoes. This would make her furious. She would hobble out, and she would shake her fist at them, but they would just tease and tell her, Tia Miseria, na, 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 na. They knew she couldn't climb the tree. They knew she couldn't chase them. When they were done eating, they would just run off laughing. And she knew their parents wouldn't do anything about it. She thought about this all the time. What could she do? Well, I said she was very kind. If you asked politely, she would share. One day, a man came to her door. He was bent from the years, and he was covered in the dust of the road. And he asked if perhaps he could rest for a few minutes on her porch and maybe have a drink of water. She looked at him, and she saw how hungry and tired he looked, and she said, No. Tonight, I'm going to give you half of my supper. And you can sleep in my bed. I take the sofa. And that's what happened. In the morning, she gave him some coffee, some bread, and he walked to the door, and he turned around to say thank you, but then something happened. He stood up straighter and taller than ever, and the years fell from him like rainwater. And he said, Tia Miseria, you were so kind that I will grant you one wish. Anything that you want. What is your wish? She knew what she wanted. She took him out to the garden, showed him the mango tree. You see that mango tree? Anybody who climbs the mango tree should get stuck until I say they can come down. Well, that was a strange request. But the stranger said, so be it. And he disappeared. He vanished. Well, the next day, the children snuck into the garden. They climbed the tree. Tia Miseria hobbled out, and she looked at them and smiled, and they teased and said, Tia Miseria, na, 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 na. She just smiled. When they were done eating, they tried to come down, but they couldn't. The little bottoms were stuck to the branches. Oh, they begged, and they cried, and they pleaded, but she just said, na, 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 na. Oh, they were there crying for a long time. When they promised that they would not steal mangoes anymore, she snapped her fingers and down they came and they were gone in an instant. Now, I did tell you that she was very old, right? Well, one day death came to her door. Tia miseria, I have come for you. Oh, is it that time? Well, if I must go, she said, I must go. But first, can you do me a favor, un favorcito? And she took him out to the mango tree. Can you give me one less mango before I have to go? That sounded reasonable enough. So Death climbed the tree, and he looked around for the ripest, the plumpest looking mango, and he plucked it. But when he tried to come down, he was stuck. He couldn't move. He roared, and he threatened, and he bellowed. But she just said, nah, 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 nah. Not many of us can thumb our noses up at death. Well, the days passed, the years passed, and no one died because death was caught in Tia Miseria's mango tree. Until one day, her neighbor came in. Her neighbor was even older than she was. And she said, Tia Miseria, look at me. I am an old woman. I cannot open my hand because of the arthritis. My knees ache all the time. I cannot sleep at night, Tia Miseria. Please, please, por favor, let death go so I can go with him. Well, she asked so nicely that she agreed, and she went to release death, but she made him promise that he would never come for her. So since that day, death comes for us all, but not Tia Miseria. Miseria lives in Puerto Rico and all over the world. Miseria is misery.
Miseria. Oh, got me again. Done. That's a great story. You know, I remember you telling that one other time, and so when you started it, but then in my weak mind, I couldn't remember the ending. Mm-hmm. And that's the ending. That's it.
Yeah, I think I've heard where the character that tricked Death grew so old that let Death go but not someone else. So
that's. Now, when did you first hear that story?
I just found it in a book.
Found it in a book.
I found it in a book.
Something you picked up on
I didn't hear. I was going, well, it doesn't really sound like a story your mother would tell you.
No,
to help
not
you
that
go
one.
to sleep.
Unfortunately, no. I found that one in the book, but like.
Yes.
Which goes to show you that research does pay off.
It does pay off. Oh, quite often. Yeah.
You know, that's great. That is just wonderful. When you go looking for a story, do you go looking for a specific thematic story, or are you just looking for a story? I mean, how does that work?
No, I just look for a story that kind of speaks to me. If I read a story, it kind of say, I like the story. So the story picks you, I'd say,
Story picks you.
Yeah. Oh.
That's a great observation, because that's very apt.
Yeah.
Fran Yardley from west of Lake Placid, she says it's a lot like maple syrup. It's the 40-to-1 ratio. That
Sap to syrup?
Sap to syrup. For every 40 stories you read, there might be one that speaks to you.
So what we just heard was syrup. Is that what you're trying to say to us? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that was actually so sweet. You don't have another one.
Well, I have another short story.
Good.
It's a story from India, actually. And it's often told by a storyteller named Jim May. You might have heard.
Yes.
It's called The Ruby.
Oh, I haven't heard him tell that, I don't think.
So here's the Ruby. The old man woke up at the edge of the village at his usual time, just before sunrise, just when a warm wind was sweeping across the land, carrying fragrances that sweetened the air, a tiny blossom here, a small garden there, the pungent whisper memory of a dying waterhole. He sat up, facing the east, where the sky was beginning to lighten, and began his morning devotions. Starting the day with prayer, as he had done for almost every day of his life. It was during these prayers that he was interrupted by hurried footsteps. Then a voice behind him, "Master! Master! Where is it?" The old man turned around slowly, and standing behind him was a young peasant dressed in rags. He was excited. His chest was heaving up and down, his eyes intense and piercing. The old man studied the young man for a long moment and asked, What is it that you ask of me?" The young man bowed to his elder, seeming to calm himself a bit, and said, "Last night I had a dream. And in my dream I came to the edge of the village and found a holy man, and here you are. And in that dream, the holy man gave me a precious jewel." "Ah," said the holy man, and he reached down and from a clump of grass he picked up a ruby that was the size of a fist, and he said, "You must mean this. I found it, I don't know where, but I have no need for it, so you may have it." And with that he handed the ruby to the young man, a man whose hand had never held more than a few copper coins at one time. He could not believe his good fortune. He held the ruby up to the sun, and his face became awash in red shadow. And he walked home, holding that ruby, his arms stretched out. He couldn't keep his eyes off of it. When he got home to his cottage, he put the ruby on the table, and he pulled up the only chair that he had, and he sat there, stroking that precious jewel, turning it this way and that way reverently. The hours passed, and that night he had difficulty sleeping. In the morning, the young man was walking the fields, the ruby secure in his pocket, when he came upon the holy man. It is said that he gave it back and said, "Here, I don't want this. No. What I want is what you know that made it so easy to give it away."
Wow. Love it. What I want is what you know that made it so easy to give it away.
The ruby.
Boy, that has an interesting twist to it, doesn't it?
Yes.
That really does. Well, thank you, Jim May, for
Yes.
carrying that story around and getting it to you. And its origin is in probably many different cultures that way, but it'd be great for a young people's group or telling it around a campfire and having people reflect on what the wise men knew.
No.
That's wonderful. I'll have to share that with Ted Bushman, who runs a camp. Probably he already tells us that story, but if he doesn't, he's going to watch this TV show on the tube, and he'll get to experience it again and figure out where it can be applied.
That sounds good.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I find that I carry stories with me, and often I'm having a conversation with somebody, go, "That reminds me of a story."
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But that's a pun unintended, a pearl of wisdom.
pearl of wisdom.
Pearl of wisdom, a ruby of wisdom.
A ruby of wisdom, but so a pithy.
Well, and the other question I was just thinking about, I met Dan Berggren, who's a folk singer, storyteller, and another friend for lunch. And you ask the question, well, what are you working on? And you hear this same kind of things that I either found the story and I'm trying to do something with it or whatever. So if I were to have a little bit of we're getting close to closing, this might be an unfair question to ask at the end of the show, but what are you working on now that you're kind of carrying around or just discovered or those kinds of things?
Well, the only thing that I'm working on, which is not quite storytelling in the pure sense, but it is storytelling. But I did write a screenplay, and I'm I'm working on a movie project. And if everything goes well, I have several actors that have committed to playing parts, musicians that are writing music for it. If all goes well, we'll start filming in New York City sometime in the spring. So looking
So
forward to
you've
that.
written, the start of this was you wrote a screenplay.
Yes.
We didn't know about that talent, did we? No, that's great. And does it have anything to do with a ruby? No, no, no. But you're going to shoot it in New York.
Yes.
Okay, and is this the first screenplay you've ever written, or the movie script?
Before this, I wrote a short film, but it was a silent. That I wrote and directed. Called The Dance of Life, and that's on YouTube. So
Okay.
if you want to look for The Dance of Life by Eliud Nieves,
You can find it. There you go. Well, that's boy, oh, wow. You are now. If I asked you if you painted in acrylics or oils, what would the answer be?
I'm sure
acrylics.
Wow.
I have an art exhibit right now at the Eden Vegan Cafe in Scranton, Pennsylvania, on Adams Avenue.
Oh, really?
And I have paintings, acrylic paintings, pen and ink drawings, and wall sculptures. And I'm donating anything that sells 100% to the Farm Sanctuary in Watkins Glen, New York. So.
Wow. So when I ask you about the art, I was being a little bit,
I know.
and you are
Nice
an
guy.
artist. Boy, oh boy, he can top me. Almost anything I ask him, he can go one more.
We have a Renaissance man.
Well, it's nice to know there's Renaissance storytellers. I mean, not so much in the period of Renaissance, but with varied interests who can express them, and because there are stories in your painting. I mean, I think one of the things that I'd like to see happen is maybe you could come sometime and tell stories about a couple of your paintings. And that's
They show and tell.
a show and tell. But no, Kevin McCrell, who's a local musician, Irish troubadour, he paints. And at the Irish American Heritage Museum, he had a showing of his oils, and sat there and told the stories of the paintings and told the songs that he'd written about them, and drank a pint of Guinness. And it was just kind of, it was very relaxed, but it was a full house, and people seemed to really get a lot out of it. So I filed that one away. It's the stories of the passion of the art. Wow.
Well, it's time to say goodbye. The hour has flown,
It really has.
and you will be flying. Well, you'll be driving back to Ithaca.
Driving back.
But we greatly appreciate you coming all the way, all the times that you do,
My
and
pleasure.
especially sharing these 3 stories with us.
So for Eliud, thank you. For Kate, thank you for all the organizational work that you do to make this happen. And it's been a pleasure to be here. And we hope that we'll see you next month when we have Motico here and another whole round of storytelling. Have a good day.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round